Good morning, everyone. Are we doing all right over there, Walter? Sweet. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Good to see everyone today. It's nice that we can now come out here and be able to join in the study of Habakkuk. Last week, we looked into a little bit more of that history in relation to when Habakkuk would have been written, talking about what would have been going on in aspects to the Battle of Calgamish, or I think that's what it was called, Calgamish, and the whole issue that was going on there with Carchemish, Battle of Carchemish, with Assyria falling down. Nineveh had finally started to no longer be the capital of Assyria, and so this is all during the time where Pharaoh Necho ends up coming to attack, and King Josiah intercepts him and results in ultimately the fall of the Assyrians. So we would like to, just to get us back into that frame of mind of what was going on with the morality of the people at this stage in the game, I would like to have a reader for Habakkuk 1, verses 2 through 4 again, please.
Verse 3 and 4?
2 to 4, please.
2 to 4. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth.
Appreciate it. Now, last week we had talked about, thanks to Brother Perry, the idea of this being going on around the time of King Josiah. So I started kind of looking a little bit more into where that was with Josiah, with the changes of the kings going on through all that time period. And it was an interesting picture that we got to see from looking into that. And I would like to actually read a little bit of that. So I would like to have someone read 2 Chronicles 34, verses 1 through 8, and then jumping down to verse 15. Yep, 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 1 through 8, and then jumps down to 15, please.
Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek God, his father David. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images. They broke down the altars of Baal in his presence, and the incense altars which were above them he cut down. And the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images he broke in pieces, and made dust of them, and scattered it on the graves of those who sacrificed to them. He also burned the bones of the priests on their altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so he did in the cities of Manasseh, Ephraim, Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and all around with axes. When he had broken down the altars and the wooden images, had beaten to the carved images unto powder, and cut down all the incense altars throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. And you said 23, okay.
No, jump down to 15.
15?
Yeah, 1-5, please.
Okay, all right. Then Hilkiah answered and said to Shaphan, the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan.
I don't know if this, because this is the way my brain always thought things happened, but did anyone notice the interesting course of events that occurred within Josiah's reign. In relation to how everything starts off. So, what year was it that they found the book of the law in relation to his whole reign? It was the last, let's see, where was it? They found the book of the law after he had already gone through and done all the destruction of these idols and gods and resetting up and refocusing everyone towards worshiping God. So the first couple of years, he comes into reign as an 8-year-old boy, and he comes in, and as an 8-year-old boy, he's like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I believe is right. I want to worship the God of Israel. And it would have been interesting that he would have come in with that mindset, because he would have just came after Manasseh, who would have had 50 years of reigning as an evil king. And then you'd also have his father, Ammon, who only reigned for 2 years before he died, right? So there was a 52-year gap of worshiping God. And here he is coming in as an 8-year-old man, or 8-year-old boy, choosing, you know what, all these gods, Moloch, these other gods, Baal, I don't want to have anything to do with them. I only want to do things with Yahweh, the true God. And that's where he is. He starts off with that, and he starts off small with Jerusalem, and then he goes massive and does everything around throughout Israel, whatever was existing in that period of time. So that was like for the first 18 years of Josiah's reign, they did not have the law of Moses, and he reigned for 31 years. And so for me, I thought that was an interesting potential parallel and correlation between why potentially when Josiah dies, about, I think it was 14 years later, that the law of Moses had yet to fully get concreted into everyone else's mindset. That the people didn't have that same mindset and same appreciation as Josiah and the other leaders would have had, because when he would have gone, the new king would have had his own new cabinet that he would have made up, and would have had a new setup that wouldn't have necessarily held to the Mosaic law. And I thought that was an interesting, really, yes, Brother Perry, can you get over?
That goes through to Ezekiel's vision of the temple in Ezekiel 40.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons we think that it's a 50-year period from the return of Christ to the opening of the temple. And it's just kind of neat to throw that in the mix.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Now, before we get out of this, just the idea of kind of where Josiah would have come from as a young man, going in and getting back into a little bit more about Habakkuk, was there any other thoughts that this would have that jumped out to you all in relation to everything? Just, I don't want to jump over too quickly.
I think there are a lot of traditions that we have that we just pass on from one family to the next family, from one generation to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really go back in time to see why we actually do it. It's just something that's carried on. It's what our family does. So
right.
Therefore we do it. But for him, he had these traditions, and then he found out why they were doing these traditions, and found out that much of those traditions came from God giving a law saying, this is what I want you to do.
Right.
And that reinforces it, that buttresses it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think for me, for some reason, I'd always thought that he had found the law of Moses, and then he goes and does everything. I think that's the way it was with Hezekiah. So for me, that's how I imagined almost all of the kings who decided a major reformation had approached it. But with Josiah, I never realized that, no, he didn't have the law of Moses when he started off. He actually had, this is potentially what his parents would have, or his mom might have taught him, or some older ancestor who had lived during the tail end of Hezekiah who was still around at this time, who was still able to impart some words of wisdom, whom we respected, that it would have enabled this to happen, because it sounded like the entire building of the temple was shut up, and so no one actually knew completely what the law had said until it finally comes in again in his ear. Ellen?
I had a question on 4 and 5 in case anybody happens to know. Okay, and the kind of the end of 4, it says they grind up the images, is what it sounds like to me, and they put them on the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. In 5, it says he burned the bones of the priests on their altars and purged Judah and Jerusalem. So I didn't know if anybody knew whether when they worshiped Baal, anybody could offer on the altars, or was it just the priest of Baal that offered on the altars? Because I was just thinking, like, you're scattering this stuff on the graves, and then are you digging them up to burn the bones? I just was confused.
Imagine today you hate the opposition so much that you go and dig up their graves, and that they would have been pretty significant graves if they were the high priests of the Baal worshippers, and then you burn them and scatter their ashes again. It's like the ultimate. I think there is somewhere in Deuteronomy, I'd have to look for it, where God says that that's what should become of the wicked. But yeah, he's really sticking his finger in their eyes.
Right. Well, when we read, I think it's more in the first or the second Kings account of this. It actually mentions that there was a prophet during Jeroboam's son and Nebat's reign that said, there's going to be a king, and he's going to take all your Baal worshippers and all your false idol worshippers and burn them and destroy their bones on the altars. And
it's reminiscent of Jerubbaal or Gideon, right, where he chops down the altar in the town, and they try to do an investigation as to what's going on. And in our Wednesday class, we were talking about the Kidron Valley because it's where Jesus went just after the Last Supper. And so we did a little research into what goes on at the Kidron Valley, and there are four instances where when there is a revival, where do they take all the idols and smash them up and burn them? It's in the Kidron Valley, just outside of where the Garden of Gethsemane is. And then just south of that, south of Jerusalem, is going to be the Valley of Hinnom, where Moloch had his altars, and they would sacrifice children. So it flows downhill from there.
right. I think ultimately the point was to make it so that no one could ever reuse these altars for anything other than they couldn't be used anymore, because they had actually been used for something that was abominable in the worship of their actual gods. If there are no other interesting points or questions or thoughts that were jumped out by this quick further understanding of what would have been going on, I would like to, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I found it. It's Leviticus 26. Just give me a sec to turn there. In verse 30. So let's see what it says. And I will destroy your high places and cut down your images and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you.
What was the verse?
26:30.
26:30. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, now that we kind of, oh yeah.
If there were actually priests that were basically in the ground long enough to be bones, you can assume that there have been generations, literally generations, that had grown up with the mingling
Right.
of the world with the things of the Lord. So there
Right.
had been whole groups of kids, all the way to grandparents, I would assume, maybe beyond,
Mm-hmm.
who had seen this as normal,
Right.
as normalized. And I think by doing it to the point of even digging up these bones and completely being done with them in a very public way was a way to completely separate the world from being mingled with the things of the Lord.
Right. And I mean, and that gives you another reason of why it would have been so hard after Josiah was there, that people easily went back into what was natural for them, because it was only for about 31 years that they had tried to fight against that mentality. Brother Roger?
Well, just the finality of the burning of the bones, as long as there's a grave, there could be remembrance, like we have tombstones today that are 200-300 years old. But when you take them, burn them, and then scatter them to the wind, 1-2 generations, there's no knowledge of these people anymore. There's nothing to tell their story or bring them on. It's a total, complete annihilation of the person and the memory of them.
Right. Right.
Erasing of the monuments, right? So when you erase the monument, you erase the memory of that history and it becomes forgotten.
Absolutely. Sorry.
After a year, the body is decomposed, and then for more space to bury people, they put them in ossuaries, which would be a place or something where they put the bones. So it'd be very easy to go get the bones and do what they
Right.
needed to do with them.
Okay.
So it's a visual in our mind.
I appreciate you explaining that a little bit better, rather than what we are used to, which is we dig a giant 6 feet down, put the box. It was actually almost a case that held a whole bunch of people, right? Okay.
Put these little cases or yeah,
So-
like a small box.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I heard correctly, it's similar to a mausoleum where it basically was a massive house that held a whole bunch of bones, right? Okay.
That's a very similar thing. Charlemagne,
Mhm.
back in the 800s, 800 when he became the first emperor, I think crowned by a pope.
Right.
His ossuary that he's in, there's hardly anything left of him. His skull's in one country, there's femurs and things in other countries and pieces of them. And his memory is kept across the world and through time. And even today, we can go and see bits and pieces of Charlemagne. So
Right.
he's still remembered even. So this is really the finale of what people will do
Right.
with the memory of people who were not righteous in God's eyes.
Right. No, I really do appreciate it. We are now going to get back into Habakkuk. So if everyone would like to turn back over to Habakkuk chapter 1, we'll start rethinking about what was going on in that time now. So with those verses that Brother Markwood, I can't remember your first name right now. Jerry. Thank you, Brother Jerry. Read, we got to see the image of what Habakkuk is dealing with, right? So he's dealing with aspects of violence that are now against the people who would worship Israel, right? We're dealing with aspects of what feels like abandonment, that God's not saving them, that there's nothing changing. There's destruction, there's conflict, and then there's even the idea of the law being paralyzed, and there's no justice ever going on, and that those who were righteous are now being hemmed in and prevented from doing anything. And kind of the flip side of what I talked about in my exhortation last week about how God holds us in a nice, careful way. Now, instead, we're being imprisoned and we can't do anything. So I was curious. Now, we had a couple thoughts that were sparked about thinking about this verse in that way, but when you think about this and the idea of calling out or crying often and waiting for that long time for God's response, is this something that we can do? Is this something that's good? Is this a bad thing for us as followers of Christ to do? I'm just curious on some of your all's thoughts about this. Is it all right for us to cry often to God while we're struggling with something, or while we are seeing what's going on seeming to be contrary to what God would want us to have going on? Sister,
Are you saying, is it all right to nag God again and again?
Yes, that's another way to put it, yes. I saw Sister Leah had her hand up.
It's the parable of the unjust steward, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Jesus told, which basically said that there was a woman in a town who kept coming to the governor of the area and making her petition. And although he wasn't a righteous man, he got so sick of her complaining that he decided to grant her request. And Jesus said, "Shall not, Yahweh,
Right.
basically, who cares for you, not attend to the needs of his saints quickly when they pray to him."
Exactly.
The other one that comes to mind is, give him no rest until he makes Jerusalem peace on earth. I forget the exact end of that verse, but yeah, I struggle with that one too, because God's got his own timetable. You know it's going to happen whether you cry out or not, but he kind of wants you to nag him, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that jumps out at me at this part of Habakkuk is that, in theory, when you look at the time period of him and Josiah, there should be great things happening.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be thinking, great, this is reform, the sun's rising, there's hope, Josiah's doing a great job, the people are turning back, and yet that's not what you hear from him, and it's not really what you hear from Joel, who's parallel with him, and with Jeremiah. Like,
Right.
Jeremiah is crying the whole time too, and it's running right along at the same time period as Josiah. So that's kind of interesting to me, that despite having this wonderful king that's doing all these wonderful things, they can obviously see the seeds of evil in these people, I guess, and know that as soon as Josiah's out of the way, they'll just immediately go back to their old ways, which is what actually happens.
Right, and you get to see the soul basically with what the people were, who they truly were, even though they were recorded as major changes going on, at least on the upper level. There was not that soul changing that needed to occur within the family unit that would have resulted in a lasting change. Sister Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that's just my personal opinion. I think nag is a harsh word,
Right.
simply because he's our father. I
Mhm.
mean, we ask our own dads for things, and I
Right.
don't see it as nagging necessarily when it's an earnest
Right.
need. Like Hannah, I mean, how many years and years did she petition God for a child? And, I think it shows favor and faithfulness to keep bringing our requests and still leaving it up to him. Thy will be done. But coming to him, I don't see it as nagging as much
Right.
as petitioning.
Right. Right.
On the idea of revival and the thought that change is hard, when you think about everybody coming out of Babylon and reestablishing everything, right?
Mhm.
Reestablishing order and godliness in the nation of Israel, you still have a lot of legacy behavior that continues on, and that's hard to get rid of, whether it's marrying outside of the family of Israel, whether that has to do with not releasing slaves that were Israelites. These traditions get embedded and they continue on, even though there's a revival that's taking place.
Right. It makes you think about the tradition that Jeremiah calls out with the Rechabites, right? The Rechabites are praised for the fact that they keep their father's tradition of avoiding actually living in cities and avoiding drinking, because it results in a negative aspect in your life. And they were holding this for the past several hundred years rather than what the children of Israel couldn't seem to do with the law of Moses. I see Brother Walter.
It's pretty rare in the scriptures where God literally says to you, I'm not going to hear you, I'm not going to see you, I don't even know you exist.
Mm-hmm.
Usually what we're seeing here, and I think Habakkuk could learn from, is that God moves and works in his time and his plan. And even though I don't see things happening, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a plan, because we see later he was going to send the Chaldeans to go take care of this problem. It was always in his plan to do so. And the idea that he isn't hearing him, I think, is a little too harsh there. He should recognize that God hears and sees all things. The question is, how does it fit into his plan? Mm-hmm. And that's what's hard for us as we read his word and we see him in our lives. What is that moment when he's been listening to me and he said, this is where I save you, this is where I make the change you want?
Right. The idea of waiting on his timing is very important. So there are a couple examples throughout Scripture that we can see of people calling for help. One of them is very impactful chapter, which is in relation to Job. Job is almost constantly crying for God to bring about help. Now, there was a couple other things that, couple places I found the idea of crying out for help consistently that I didn't necessarily think about beforehand. So I would like to quickly read Zechariah chapter 1, verses 12 through 17. And then can I also have someone starting to pull up Revelation chapter 6?
Zechariah 1?
Yep, Zechariah chapter 1, verses 12 through 17.
Then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long wilt thou not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, against which thou hast had indignation these 70 years? And the Lord answered, the angel that talked with me with good words and comfortable words. So the angel that communed with me said unto me, Cry thou, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy. And I am very sore displeased with the heaven that are at ease, for I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affiliation. Therefore, thus said the Lord, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies, my house shall be built in it, said the Lord of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. For I yet, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, my cities through prosperity shall yet be spread abroad, and the Lord shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem.
Appreciate it. So this shows, at least in the idea of the return of Israel to Jerusalem, this is something that was written during the reign of Darius, that this was something that was still going on in the eyes and the mindsets of those who knew about the prophecies that Jeremiah and others had written, saying, we'll eventually return to Israel. There was still this questioning of, for the past 70 some odd years, when are we actually finally going to return to Israel? And that was I think a positive view of when that is occurring. And then also we had someone pulling up Revelation chapter 6, verses 10 through 11, please.
And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as there were should be fulfilled.
Appreciate it. And in this reference, we get to see the idea of those who have been longing for the return of Christ and the destruction of the enemies of the world, or of God, right? And Jesus is calling for an idea of patience. So even within every aspect of calling out for this, or calling out for God to do something, there's the idea of we need to wait on His timing. We can't necessarily get everything when we want it, otherwise there would be no appreciation, I think, for when things eventually do come about. And the references, as I said, all deal with the idea of people crying out and making supplication to God for an extended period of time. There seems to be a length of time that occurs. And I wanted to ask you all, what are some of the things that in your prayers you are asking for constantly? They can be things like the peace of Jerusalem, or the kingdom on this earth, or for the will of our Heavenly Father to be done on this earth. What were some of the things that almost habitually you may sometimes ask for, but not necessarily think about just the impact of what it would have and what a great thing it will be?
Constantly pray for my children, right? Every prayer. Yeah.
Right.
I pray to have peace while I go through whatever it is God is teaching me, whatever journey He's putting us on, that maybe we would rather not be there, but we know He's brought us there. But to have the peace while you go through it, that He's working in you, your righteousness, to bring it forth.
Sister Leah?
Just for the health and the growth of the ecclesia, the protection of the ecclesia from, false doctrines and influences that aren't good for it.
Mm-hmm.
The growth of the ecclesia, things like that.
Right. I know something that I tend to pray about is the idea for, Sister Debbie?
I have really enjoyed using this 6-month prayer challenge list.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really excellent list. It's really helped me broaden my prayers to things that are really important, not just focus so much on me, my family. I think we all typically immediately pray for our children, our spouse, but this list has really been helpful. I'll just quickly go over it. I'm sure you all have it, but giving thanks and praise for the blessings God has given us, the elderly, the sick, those struggling with mental health, forgiveness for our sins, unity, wisdom, that we bear good fruit, our children, and not just our own children, all of those in our ecclesia, showing love, that our ecclesia would be a light stand. I just think this is such an excellent list. I think it's been very, very helpful.
Right. Absolutely. Brother Randy?
I pray for the speakers and the teachers and all the ecclesias that they'll be profitable.
We really do appreciate that. Well, looks like the doors have opened and we should be seeing everyone coming back on up here soon. Next week, my hope is to kind of look at Jesus as an example of someone who was calling out to God constantly. And because for me, whenever I'm trying to do a class, I at least want to make certain that we taught in Jesus throughout it, because he's supposed to be found throughout Scripture. And so next week we'll be looking at how Jesus fits into somewhat similar to what Habakkuk was dealing with, and some of the things that Habakkuk says. All right. Looking forward to seeing y'all next week. Talk about that.